once again, I have looked through these prior to this session, so I shall go straight in and comment on them in the usual way. So the first image is called Light and Shade. Now, yeah, this is quite an interesting picture, isn't it? It's playing with the lighting on this young lady, brightly lit from one side with the other side of the face in quite deep shadow. There is still some information there. I can still see her eye. I can see there's obviously a little bit of light in the eye as well, glinting back at me, a little highlight. So it's not completely hidden. The bright side of the face is very bright. Her skin is, I mean, she either has absolutely wonderfully smooth skin, or it is so highly lit that I'm losing detail. But I suspect it's actually the former. I think there's still information there. So, you know, fair enough. Now the question is, do I want to be able to see that right eye, or do I want that to be completely black? It is peering at me out of the dark, and I'm not entirely sure about that. And the other thing too, which I think is a shame, and I don't know how easy it would have been to put it right, if that shadow had been like in a straight line from her chin up through her nose and through the centre of her forehead. As it works out, you know, the shadow sort of veers away to the right, so you can see more than half her forehead, which, given what I think you were trying to achieve here, is a little bit of a shame. But I do like the idea. I do like the way you've tried to implement this, and I think it's quite reasonably effective. And so today that one will get a 16. So now we move on to the picture called Aquamarine 2006. So this view across the sea, that rather splendid sky, I have to admit, and a lady sitting there on the rock looking out across the sea, good level horizon, thank you for that. Yeah, that's the picture we have with us, with this large area of rock forming up most of the bottom half of the picture. And it's an interesting enough rock. There's some nice textures there, some nice shapes, and the backlighting has revealed those textures very well. The lady is very central, looking out. Not really a problem. I can go with that. But I have to confess, I don't find it a fantastically exciting picture. It's interesting, and it's quite well done. There's some interesting glow of light appears to be just where she's sitting on the rock. I'm not quite sure why. I mean, I could say the sun's shining out of her. No, I won't do that. But that's what it. There's a slight light glow there, which is a bit strange. But no, it's a decent enough picture. In the context of the other pictures here that I'm looking at, I think that one's going to get a 15. So I move on to the next one, Barn Owl. Now I know there are things set up where you can photograph these birds where they're sort of launched in front of you and, you know, made to fly across your path and all the rest of it. But nevertheless, that doesn't make them easy to photograph. And I think this has been very well captured indeed. It's pin sharp on the face and on the eyes there. In fact, virtually the whole of the bird. The wings are well frozen, so and I'm given that one wing is up and one wing is sort of level, I'm assuming they were actually flapping, or is he just veering off to one side? I don't know. Whatever. The shutter speed you have used has frozen the movement, and it's beautifully sharp. It's plenty of detail there. There's good light on the bird with a fairly subdued background. In fact, interesting looking at it, you know, the background looks as if it's sort of late in the day or something. It's really quite dark, and yet the bird is well lit. Did you have flash on it, I wonder? Maybe it's something like that. Certainly it works very well indeed. I think this is a really good capture, giving you all the information you want. Yeah, very well done indeed. So that's going to be my first 20 of this group. So now we move on to a picture of Becky, who's quite a bold young lady with the various piercings. I don't know how they cope with the piercings, but there we go. I mean, it shows her character, the wonderfully coloured hair, deep brown eyes staring straight at the camera. Really a very bold model and a very bold picture of her, which I am enjoying. What I'm less keen on, I'll be quite honest with you, is the bright background. I think she would have stood out better against a darker background. I find the light area, it's not bright white, but it's still kind of dragging my eye away from the bit that I really want to look at, which is her eyes, which are staring straight at me. Quite a glorious stare. I love that. The other thing I'm not totally convinced by is the horizontal landscape format, because you're cutting her off. I don't mind cutting her off through the hair at the top, that's fine, but you're also cutting her off very close to the chin, and her hair on the left of the picture, the right side of her face, is hanging down out through the frame. I think I'd kind of like to see a little bit more below her chin. This, to me, doesn't feel as if it's cut off in the most comfortable place. And, you know, therefore maybe the portrait upright format might have worked more satisfactorily in this particular example. Nevertheless, you know, well lit, well exposed, and because of the model you have here, a very striking picture. That will be a 16. Now we move on to Blee Tarn. I like the way you've cropped this as a sort of letterbox widescreen format. It's absolutely well suited to the scene. It's a lovely location. I have been to Blee Tarn myself on a number of occasions, and it's delightful, not only because it looks pretty, but because you tend to have fewer visitors there. So it's a lovely empty place, and this is a lovely scene. And of course what you have there is that hint of a rainbow. In fact, quite a large bow if I look at it, but it shows up particularly against the dark blue of the mountains in the background, and I think that, of course, is a key element of this picture and adds significantly to its interest. It's a lovely scene. That's quite a heavy sky, quite cloudy, lots of texture in it, so it's not plain. That's good. And as I say, yes, that rainbow definitely picks up the picture and makes it that little bit more special. So well done for capturing that, well done for being there at the right time and being ready for it. That one's going to be a 17. So now we move on to Holy Concert. Right, I'm probably missing something here. I'm not sure why it's holy, but nevertheless, what we have here is the poster advertising this event, which is taking place at the venue, which appears as both in picture on the poster itself and in the background behind the poster, protruding up into that cloudy sky. So, you know, you're giving me the picture of the venue and telling me the sort of thing that's going on there, this particular event, whatever it is. Apologies, I don't speak German. But it's yeah, you know, you're showing me what it's all about, and you're telling me a bit of a story there. I'm not sure just how effective it is as a story. The poster it's almost two pictures. There's the poster itself, which is someone else's work, if you like, but it's quite an interesting poster. And then there's that building behind, which in itself is a rather interesting place. And you know, is one part more interesting than the other? Could you just concentrate on the building? I suppose you were trying to tell me what it's used for. Yeah, I'm not over convinced by this as a composition. And one little technical thing is the building's leaning to the left. I hope it isn't in real life. I don't think you've got the camera quite upright here. And again, that's something you can easily correct after you've taken the picture. I have to confess, when I'm taking portrait orientation, I very seldom get the camera upright. I always got it on the twist. So I almost inevitably have to straighten it up afterwards when I get it back on the computer. Easily done. And if you're entering a picture for a competition, that's the sort of thing you can easily do, and it's one less thing the judge can moan about. Yeah, so that one's going to be a 14. The next one up is Puffin with Sand Eel Catch. This is an absolute classic picture of the puffin, isn't it? They are such delightful creatures, wonderful to photograph, and this one really has a superb beakful. In fact, you wonder how they managed to get them in, don't you? How do they manage to pick up another one without dropping the first ones? I'm not sure. Anyway, they do a wonderful job of it, and this is a great illustration of you know, the typical puffin pose, if you like. I like the neutral plain background. I think that's fine. Um, the puffin itself doesn't seem to be well lit. The whole picture looks quite dark and heavy, and I think that's a bit of a shame. If you had more direct light on the bird itself, so that it really stood out and leapt out against that fairly somber background, I think it would have been a lot more powerful. Now, you can't always control the lighting on the day. I recognise that, and the pose you've got is great, but when it comes to entering competitions, you really want the very best pictures you can get, and I would love more light on this and a bit of a brighter image. Whether you could do anything in post processing, I don't know. I suspect there simply wasn't enough light there in the first place to help you to really bring it out, but you might be able to lighten the tones a little on the white part of the face around the eye there, and just lift it out of the background a bit more. Nevertheless, it's a good catch, so that one's going to be 18. Now we move on to the picture of Seven Sisters. What a glorious coastline this is, and what a lovely, lovely picture of it. In fact, fantastic lighting conditions, that magnificent sky, and even the sea looks really rather fine in this picture. And it's quite sort of contrasty image you've given me here. Indeed, the top of the cliffs, the whatever it is, grassy areas, I suppose, are very dark indeed. Very little texture there, because the way you've processed it is to give it this punch, this vibrance, if you like. And I actually think it's working rather well, because it brings out the texture of that sky, it brings out the texture of the sea, and it brings out the texture of the chalk cliffs themselves, and that's what's important. It's really showing up their shape very well indeed. The sort of the undulations at the top of the cliffs really brings it out rather well, and I think you framed it pretty well as well. You've got a little bit of the top on the very right hand side. You've got that little sort of framing of the chalk cliffs there, and sun beating down on the left hand side. No, I think that's working rather well. I quite like that one, so I'm going to give that one 18. Now then, the next one along is called South Quay Canary Wharf. I mean, this is a bold approach. Good for being something different. Good for trying a different angle, for creating something quite dramatic and really interesting. I'm not going to complain this one's at an angle on the tilt, because you knew that. This is exactly what you wanted. You're creating drama, you're creating impact by using this metal bench as a foreground, and the curve of the bench and the perforations in the metal creating this interesting repetitive pattern, and the whole thing sort of guiding you through along this valley almost that's made by the bench, guiding you through and looking forward to the buildings beyond. And of course, by presenting it in monochrome, you are very much concentrating on the patterns, on the lines, on the shapes, with no distracting colour, and that really works so well for this particular image. Yes, I think that's very good. Good contrast, good control of the tones. There's plenty of detail throughout. A very dramatic approach. So good for trying something that little bit different, and something that not everyone, not every photographer even, would spot as an opportunity. So well done for that. That one will be 18. Now we move on to the little bird picture called Paddling. Now this isn't a natural history competition, so I can accept that title. It's not, you're not trying to tell me anything about the bird itself other than that it's an attractive illustration of a bird standing in the water, and that's fine. I have no problem with that. It's very well captured. It's very sharp, exposure is well held, there's lovely detail even in the water, little highlight in the eye as well, not always easy with birds and animals like this, but well positioned in the frame, on the left hand side looking out towards the right, classic composition, and lovely colours to, the colours in the water, sort of muted greens and browns, really make a very suitable and attractive background to this excellent portrait of the little bird. Okay, it's not doing anything special, it's just standing there looking around, but that's fine, that's fine. Getting its feet wet and enjoying, maybe it's cooling down in the water, who knows if this was a hot summer's day. It looks like it's fairly bright, there's good lighting on the bird itself. So, no, well taken, well spotted, good exposure. So that one is another 18. Now we move on to a picture called Thomas Becket Church, and this is really sort of delightful, calming landscape picture, isn't it? Very gentle. That band of mist across the middle, of course, is an interesting feature. So what's this? An early morning picture, I'm guessing. The sun just rising over the horizon there, and a beautiful silhouette, the outline of the church itself. Light reflecting in a little pool of water just sort of below the church in the picture. Interesting little clouds in the sky, not too much. And then, of course, you've got this sheep on the right-hand side, wondering what the heck you're doing at this time in the morning, putting up your tripod and hanging around there. But I'm glad you did, because this is a really pleasant, enjoyable picture. It's not the top marks in tonight's competition, but again, it's just well done, well taken, and this is what landscape photography is about: getting out at all times of the day as necessary to capture the right light, to capture the mist, and to capture this really rather peaceful scene on what looks like a delightful morning. So that one is going to be 18. Right, the next one is Psychedelic Ship. My goodness me, it is a bit psychedelic, isn't it? You know, when I first saw this, I thought you'd done a bit of colour popping. The ship itself is very brightly coloured, but the sky and the water almost look plain black and white, plain grey. But looking closely at it, I can see a patch of blue poking out between the clouds, and there are colours in the water. The green of the ship is reflected in the water there on the left-hand side. And on the far side of what is probably a river, might even be the Thames, as I see the ship is registered in London, I can see trees which definitely have some green in them. So whether you desaturated partially the rest of the scene, I don't know, but it's really making this ship stand out. And the ship itself is, I'm wondering actually whether you wound up the colour saturation on there, because it is very bold. And it is this contrast between the boldness of the colour of the ship and the almost a monochrome background, which perhaps is what you were trying to emphasise. But I'm personally not convinced by that contrast. I'd like to see, although it is all about the psychedelic colours of the ship, I understand that. Nevertheless, I think a slightly more, I'm going to say natural looking picture. I mean, forgive me if this is exactly what it looked like, but it doesn't look entirely natural to me. I think a little less saturation on the ship might have helped, and I think it would still created the story that you're trying to tell. Otherwise, as a picture, it's fairly straightforward. The ship more or less fills the frame. You've got a little bit of information about where it is. As I say, you can see the other side of the river. Interesting clouds. For me, it's not a fantastic picture, but you know, I can see the attraction of it, and as I say, you have illustrated your theme well enough. That's a 16. Okay, so now we have this portrait, Looking Towards the Light, it's called. And I think this is an interesting approach as well. Yeah, it looks like the light is shining directly on her face, so the under her chin and sort of the back of her cheek, you can see the light fading away because of the curvature of her face. So it's showing up the shape of her face and of her head very well. A little bit of shadow below her bottom lip. I think that's not unacceptable. So she's looking upwards, as you say, towards the light. So I think that the pose and the composition I find very pleasant. A couple of points I will raise. Look, she's got more piercings. This one in the nose this time. Goodness. Yeah, a couple of things I was going to raise. The eyelashes from the right eye poking up above her nose. I can't see her eye. I can only see the eyelashes, and I'm not sure that's ideal. I think either you need to see a bit more of the eye, or you need to turn her face a little bit further away from the camera so those eyelashes are hidden, or perhaps lower the camera slightly, whichever, just to hide those. So I do find those slightly disturbing. It looks like she's got a tuft of hair growing on her nose. And the other thing is these out of focus highlights in the background. I quite like them, but I'm not sure about the positioning of them. Again, the one behind her right eyelashes, the one just off the top of her nose, and the one coming out of her mouth. I think if you could have a bit of a space between those highlights and her face, in my view, that would be better. I'm not very keen on the overlap. But the idea is good, and you know, that's worth trying. And maybe if you have the opportunity, fiddle about, have another go, see whether you can make fine adjustments to the position of the highlights in the background, fine adjustments to the position of your model's face, and all these things can turn what is a great idea and a good picture into something really great. So that one I'm going to give 17. Moving on to Sunset with Old Boat. Now, this is quite strongly yellow coloured. Now, that may well be the true colour of that surface. It's a kind of it looks like stony rather than sandy, so I'm not totally sure. And there's a kind of a cyan hue to the sky too. Now, this may be totally accurate, but it just strikes me that the colour balance doesn't feel right, even for a sunset. So, you know, apologies if that's the colour you saw, but just because that's what it was doesn't mean that's what looks best in the photograph. I think reducing the yellow in this would help improve the overall balance. Apart from that, yeah, you've got the boat. It's in a good position. The bow facing to the left with a bit of space in front of it. That's good. You've just got the stern within the picture frame. Pretty tight. You could have perhaps moved back just a fraction to include that. I like the light shining through the clouds. But okay, so it's a boat on a beach or on the stony surface. And there's nothing really special about the boat, to my mind. Nothing really special about the setting. It's got the sort of feel of Dungeness about it. I don't know whether that's where it is. And I'm not sure whether you could have made more of this. Perhaps even just going in close on the boat and looking at some of those structures. If you look at the where it's sort of splitting and tearing apart, where it's rotting, you know, some lovely detail there, which would have made an interesting photograph as well. Yeah, it's a derelict boat on a bit of derelict ground. It doesn't do a great deal for me, but it's still worth trying. And you know, I'd have probably taken it myself, but I'd then have gone around and taken a lot more photographs, and hopefully I'd have got one which I found more exciting when I got back home. So that one is going to be a 14. Next we come on to coming into dock. So a view across the river with a wonderful sky, wonderful colours. Now those are to me reasonably believable colours, but even if they're not, it has a wonderful overall effect. It gives this feeling of evening with the sun producing the rays of light through the clouds, and the wonderful outline, the silhouettes of the buildings in the background. It's an interesting skyline, quite recognisable shapes, and I think that's good. The boats on the river, they obviously add interest because you've got the mast sticking up, and certainly the boat towards the bottom right is that in sort of a third of the way in from the right hand side. That's in a good position, and the hull is clear of the other boats, so you can see its outline clearly against the water. That's good. Some of the other boats, though, are kind of merging into each other and less interesting. So one of the main features here is the little boat. I think it's a motorboat rather than a rowing boat, towards the bottom left with the two people in it. I mean, that at least stands out quite bold against the sunlit water. And that provides a sort of a foreground interest. I think that's fine. But certainly the the buildings in the background, the shapes they create, and that lovely sky, those you've caught well. Those are really interesting. That was good. Overall, I think I'll give that one a 15. Okay, the next one's called On Target. Excuse me while I just take a drink of water. That's better. Now, this is quite fun, isn't it? A studio shot. Well, the studio may have been a gym, but you've turned the gym into a studio. And this girl punching the bag and with clouds of dust, whatever you've used, talcum powder or whatever you've used, coming off the bag, floating out over her shoulder, and that's really quite fun. You know, she doesn't look like she's punching it really hard. And I'm looking at her face now. It's just kind of a, oh, look, I'm touching this bag and creating a dust flower. Could you have got her to look a bit angry, really looking as if she's really working out hard and punching that bag with all her energy and all her force. The actual fist itself, the actual glove on the bag, that looks good. I love the powder flying everywhere. I just want her to look like she's really doing the workout, and she doesn't to me. It does look a bit posed, which is a bit of a shame because I think this is quite a good shot otherwise. And yeah, it has worked quite well. I'm thinking about that one. I like the lighting. The black background, that's fine. Yeah, I think I'm going to give that one an 18. Okay, now here's the same young lady again. This time, rather than calling her Becky, you've just called her Bex. And this is, I mean, she's a striking looking girl, obviously. Again, with the piercings, those eyes, fantastic eyes she has. That lovely, lovely hair. And this one I think works a lot more successfully. The dark background I think shows and makes me concentrate just on her brightly lit face. And that's what I want to do. Those eyes looking straight at me, they draw me in. The slightly open mouth. You can see all her hair down the full length of it, and her shoulders and the top of her dress. And I think that's working so much better than the other one. It's a portrait format which helps show all the things we want to see. And then you've got this lace curtain or whatever it is hanging down on the left as a frame. I think that's fine. I think that's working well. Yes, I really rather enjoy that. Yeah, good lighting. I mean, again, this may have been I don't know, a club night maybe where you had models in, or maybe it's something you set up yourself. I don't know, but either way, the lighting is good, and the pose is good. Yeah, no, a good shot, that one. So that one is going to be, I'll make that a 19. Now we have flamenco. Now I do like this. This is imaginative, it's creative, it's impressionistic. It's not just a straight photograph. You're trying to give me this impression of movement, of action, the dancing. And the lady's face, her head, looks sharp. And okay, it's rather turned away from us, but you know, she's in the pose of the dance. Her arm up over her head, the dress flying up. It's all movement apart from her head, which I can see very clearly, and that's rather clever. So yes, she's definitely got the dance, and then very cleverly in the background, quite soft, just lit, just poking in, you've got the guitarist, which is, you know, it gives the full story, gives the picture, and it's rather fine actually the way the shape of her back, her dress, her back, and her arm creates this kind of arc around the guitarist, making a shape for him to sit in. I think that's very imaginative and really rather well executed, and I enjoy that. So that one's going to get a 19. Now we're looking at the old sea dog in his environment. Beautifully sharp, isn't it? Wonderfully crisp picture, showing all the details of his hair and his beard and the skin. You know, he looks like he's been around a while and seen a good few sea trips, and that's the story you're trying to create for me. He's got his hat on, and yes, he's in his environment. You can see things behind which I could well assume to be a ship or something of a nautical nature. The bell to the right there, it definitely looks quite nautical. If you're calling it an old sea dog and his environment, I wouldn't have minded a bit more of his environment. Just come back just a little, and let's see a bit more of the nautical environment behind him. But good lighting on his face, beautiful exposure, fantastically sharp, very well done. So a good, decent portrait of this guy. I'm sure he'd be pleased with it. I think in this competition that's going to be a 17. Now then, we're looking at pebbles. This looks like something you've arranged yourself. I don't know what the surface is. It's reflective, but it doesn't look like a beach to me. Can't really tell what that surface is. But you've piled up these pebbles, I suspect yourself. You've put it against a blue background. I mean, it looks like a beach, doesn't it? You've got the right sort of slightly yellowy tones to the base there, and the blue of the sea and the sky behind. So yeah, it looks like a sea scene with the kind of pebbles you might find on the beach, and you've piled them up in this rather attractive style. And they're lovely pebbles. They've got lovely patterns in them, sort of veins of different colours, of different, presumably different compounds within the rock itself, and it's quite pleasant. It's not spectacular. It's a good experimental piece of work. It's a good sort of studio piece to play with if you're a little bored one day and you want something to take. And at the moment, when this is taken in the middle of our lockdown during the coronavirus epidemic, this is the great sort of thing for us all to be trying out. So yeah, a decent experimental picture. That gets a 16. Now we have Queen's 2019, taken during the tournament. Obviously, you had quite a good seat by the looks of it, reasonably high up, so you get a good view over the court, but looking along the length of it, so you didn't have to turn your head backwards and forwards for every shot. That's pretty good, a lot more comfortable, more like the sort of view you get on television from the television cameras, isn't it? And it's quite a good grouping, isn't it, of the three people here. The guy who's just taken a backhand swipe at the ball, his partner ducking to keep under the ball, very wise, and then the linesman there watching what's going on, well framed within the picture. So yeah, it's a good grouping, and quite a decent sports shot, showing the action as it occurs. For all that, for some reason, it doesn't particularly excite me. Although the grouping is good, and you have caught the action well, I'm just not feeling overly excited. But I don't know why not. I shouldn't complain too much. I think that's. I'm the more I look at it, the more successful I think it has been. It's not an easy thing to photograph from the stands. Let's give that one a 17. Now then, Lady in the Woods. You can see the lady there at the background on the right. You can see her eyes looking through the trees. You can see her hair. I think I can see the strap of her dress on the shoulder at the bottom there. This is an interesting idea, isn't it? It might have been a double exposure in camera, or it might have been created on the computer afterwards. I don't know. But it certainly has an interesting effect. I'm not sure that the lady herself comes through strongly enough to illustrate the theme that you're attempting here. But I like the tracery of the trees, lovely shapes, lovely silhouettes there. But it's almost that I didn't see the face until I read the title and realised that there had to be something there. Now, the more I look at it now, the more obvious the face is. Once you've seen it, you can't lose it. But I think it's almost too obscured by the branches. But it is a very interesting idea. I like the thought behind this. By the way, the presentation, I quite like the little red key line around the outside. I know some judges don't like key lines on projected images, but I think sometimes it can work just to highlight the edge of the picture from the rest of the black screen. So no, that's not a bad picture actually. 17. Now then, we'll get this one right. Leading lights. As photographers, we love spiral staircases. They just work so well, don't they? Your eye naturally follows the curves round and round through, and it's led in through to the centre. And here the centre is filled by these rather delightful pendant lights, and with a scattering of something right at the very bottom there. I don't know what that is. Scattering of lights. I don't know what's at the very bottom. I don't even know how far down this staircase goes, because it gets very dark down there apart from the hanging lights. But it certainly is an intriguing structure. And you've given us someone on the staircase as well. Sometimes we like to include people on these staircases. Sometimes we just show them as a pure architectural feature, as a shape, as a design, as an abstract pattern effectively. But here, no, I think it's fine to include someone, and their position in the frame is quite good. They're not sort of over dominant, they're just there to create some human interest and some scale, I guess. I do wonder if could you have moved maybe slightly further up the staircase just to hide the bottom of those windows. The bright light shining through the glass is perhaps a bit of a shame, because it stands out against the rest of the picture. If you could have cut out at least the glass and you could have included the window ledge, that would have been fine, I think. I just wonder whether that slight shift might have made it a little bit better. Nevertheless, I like the design. I like the way you control the lighting. I think it's good, rich tones, rich colouring, and for me that one's going to be an 18. Okay, now we come on to Llanberis. It's another peaceful, beautiful scene, isn't it? Gorgeous blue colouring receding into the distance there. Also sort of a little glow over the valley in the distance, but the darker clouds up above. Beautiful reflections and almost still water. The only slight jarring thing for me is this patch of ground in the foreground. Not the ground itself, but the colour of it, which just kind of it doesn't match the rest of the picture, which is cool and calm. And then you've got this rather bright orangey foreground, which clashes a bit. Now, if that were also fairly muted, dark greens or browns, then the overall picture would have had this fairly sombre mood, I suppose, but rather calming mood overall. Whereas that bright colour at the bottom kind of takes that away a little bit. But it is a gorgeous scene, and it's well captured. So that's going to be a 17. Okay, moving on to Orange Rose. Beautifully captured, a lovely bloom. It's in reasonable condition. When you take a photograph like this, a close-up of a flower, you want it to be a good example of that flower, and I think you've got a good example here. Quite strong lighting, so there's quite a lot of contrast between the brightest parts of the bloom and the darkest parts. That's fine. Generally, I think that taking photographs like this is better under perhaps a hazy sky, a cloudy sky, not necessarily dark cloud, just a hazy sun to give modelling, but without being too bright on the brightest parts of the petals. But you've managed to hold it pretty well. You've got the detail there, and obviously you've placed it, you positioned it against the green background, which is looking fairly natural. It's not an exceptional picture, it's a very competent picture. It shows the rose, and that's what you're aiming at. So that today gets a 16. Now we move on to this monochrome image called A Woman's Work. Now I have to admit, I rather like this. When I first saw it, it just struck me it's the framing created by this window with the. I mean, you've made it symmetrical within the window space. So the dark frame of the walls on the inside, and then the lighter walls inside this alcove with the window and a view out beyond to something green and garden-like by the looks of it. And then this lady, a nun, I assume, sitting there working at whatever she's working at. I don't quite know what she's doing. It doesn't really matter. I just think that's a rather fine scene. Even her position within the frame is good. Her head doesn't intrude onto the edge of the window frame. That's good. So she's just, outlined against the wall behind. Even though she's dressed in white, she stands out clearly against the white wall behind. You have sufficient difference in the tones for her to stand out. And then the woven basket on the bench the other side of the alcove. And you've managed to control the exposure so well here. This could have gone horribly wrong, but you've got it very well, including the view through the window. So that's not ultra bright as it might have come out. It looks genuine. It looks real. I can see what's outside the window, but the lovely lighting inside the window, lovely textures, just lovely shape, and I just find this a very pleasing image altogether. I'm going to give that 120. Right, now this next one's a Judge Bate, isn't it? Creative Zebra. Right. Now then, I'm trying to work out how this was produced, but there are several possible answers here, and I'm going to get it wrong, whatever I say. This could be a remarkably clever piece of Photoshop work, where somehow you've managed to move these stripes and have them sticking up in the air, and you've created that very well. And where the stripes would have been on the side of the animal, you've got good texture of the fur as it stands underneath. It looks all very believable. Well, apart from the fact that the stripes are sticking up, the fur underneath looks believable. So did you create this in Photoshop, or was this some sort of piece of artwork? This model zebra with the stripes sticking up that you found somewhere, and was it set against this background, or did you post it there yourself? I don't know. It's one of those pictures I really can't tell. If you created it in Photoshop, you've done a remarkably good job. Well done to you. You've mastered the art. If it is a statue or a stuffed animal which has been modified in some way, then well, that's interesting. You've photographed it in such a way as to leave me totally flummoxed, and I don't really know how you've done it. So it's good fun. It's certainly an interesting picture, an entertaining picture, and it makes it a very difficult one to mark. But I think overall I shall go with an 18. Right, glass at Kew. Now I wouldn't immediately have recognised this as glass, at least not some of it, but it's rather beautiful, isn't it? And whether it's at Kew or anywhere else, well, that's seems to me to be almost irrelevant. It's just some wonderful patterns here. Now, okay, someone has made this glassware and they've done an absolutely beautiful job of it, but you've managed to photograph it superbly. The lighting on it is really excellent. It shows all the colours, all the patterns, all the structures of it, of the various elements here, and it's positioned on this black background. I think works well. There's a hint of a reflection on the left hand side on whatever surface this glassware is sitting on, or in fact I can see another hint towards the right as well of a reflection. But it's just a beautiful abstract pattern picture. It's a very attractive piece of work, and I think your skill in photographing it has shown through here. Again, another red key line all the way around, which you've picked out one of the key colours within the glassware itself and used that as a frame, and I think that works well. yeah, I'm going to give that another 20. Okay, now we move on to, is that Knaresborough Viaduct in Autumn? It's a very attractive scene, isn't it? It's the sort of, without being at all insulting, it's a postcard scene or the scene you'd see on a picture calendar, and it's an attractive location. The viaduct is interesting in itself, and then all the buildings you can see through the arches and the buildings you can see behind. It's a very attractive place, and you photographed it. You've composed the picture, I think, very satisfactorily. What I'm struggling a little bit with, though, is the quality here. It's got a peculiar texture to it, as if you've over sharpened it, or you've given it too much. You've wound up the texture slider too much, or it could just be that you took it on a simple camera with a rather low resolution, and maybe we're seeing excessive JPEG artifacts here. I'm not sure what it is, but it's very, very granular structure to it, which I think is quite off-putting. So if that's just the quality of the images that your camera produces, well, so be it. But it's tough, isn't it, when you're up against competition from other pictures which are technically quite superb. I don't find, if this is, on the other hand, a texture that you added to it, that you created yourself, then personally I don't think it's helping the picture. As a composition, it's adequate, it's perfectly good. It's not spectacularly original or creative, but it's great. And as I say, if you were taking a photograph for a calendar or a postcard, this would be great, provided the quality was there. As it stands, I'm going to give it 16. All right, Masai woman. It's more piercings, isn't it? And holes in the ear and all kinds of things. What amazing decorations. Yeah, I mean, I love myself taking portraits of people in other parts of the world, because people look different, don't they? And it's interesting to see them, and it's good to have good portraits of them. And this lady is really a fascinating lady and such a great subject. I would certainly have taken her photograph myself. It's not perfect portrait, though. The lighting on her face is not great. It looks like it's a bright sunny day, but of course she has very dark skin, and it hasn't really picked up the light very well, particularly on the left hand side of the picture, the right hand side of her face. They're really losing her eye in the shadow there, and there's a dark shadow from her nose across her cheek, the little highlight next to it. It's her face really is dark against a quite bright background, or relatively bright background. And yes, even looking at her clothing, it's not as well lit as I would like. So I'm not quite sure why it's come out like this, given that it's clearly a bright sunny day. Maybe you just had her facing in the wrong direction, I'm not sure. Or maybe your camera was fooled by the brighter background and underexposed slightly. Maybe we could have done with a bit more exposure. Thinking about her positioning in the frame, she's fairly central. I don't really mind that. Although as she's looking off towards the left, you could perhaps have had a bit more space on the left. But I think what I find most troubling is the way her head pierces that sort of the line of the field or whatever she's standing in, or where that field joins the sky. I would have been tempted to get a little bit higher if I could, so that her head was totally within the yellow of the field behind, or maybe try a more dramatic shot from lower down, so her head was up against the blue sky. That might have been interesting as well, and it would certainly have given a different view. So it's a difficult one. It's a great subject, and I like the portrait, but I think there was room for improvement. Nevertheless, I think I'll go with a 17 for that one. Okay, now we're on to Pansy's Focus Stacked. Pansy's Focus Stacked. Well, yes, I can well believe you used a focus stack for this, because when you get in this close, the depth of field is really rather limited, and if you don't use the focus stacking technique, you're going to have great difficulty getting sufficient depth of field for the whole of the balloon to be in focus. Even with a very small aperture is sometimes not enough, and then of course you can get diffraction effects which make it look less sharp than you want it to. So fine, well done for using this technique, and I think it's worked successfully here. Everything that I want to be in focus is in focus throughout those blooms, and yet, well, good, the rock or whatever it is in the very background is still slightly out of focus. That's great. This is one of the values of focus stacking. If you have a very small aperture, your depth of field can be so large that stuff in the background appears sharp as well. But with focus stacking, you can use a slightly smaller aperture and just take multiple photographs at different focus points and join them together afterwards in the software, and this is the effect you get. So technically good. The lighting is again a bit bright. I would say flowers like this often better photographed under slightly softer lighting, so you don't get such a harsh contrast, and you can bring out the richness of the colours throughout, rather than the bright areas and then there are the dull areas you have here. That leaf towards the bottom right is covering one of the flowers as well, which I think is a bit of a shame. I would have seen no harm in just pushing that behind the bloom, so you got all three blooms showing through clearly. And so as a composition, I like the fact you got three. That works well, but the leaf bottom right does kind of spoil it a little bit, and yeah, it's technically as a technical exercise, you've done well. You've achieved what you wanted. You've got it all in focus. As a composition, I'm less excited, so that will be a 16. Now we have a picture of Cobalt Point. Now, I've seen plenty of pictures of this structure before. It is very attractive. You've taken a lower viewpoint than some that I have seen, so that the curve of the structure is less obvious. You're not making the curve such a prominent feature, although of course you can still see it sweeping through in a curve up to the pole at the end. But what it's done is this lower viewpoint means that about a third of the picture is sky, and the sky is really rather plain. There is some cloud towards the top left, or some darkness, some change of texture, but there's not a lot of interest in that sky. So I do wonder whether you could have pointed the camera down or taken a higher viewpoint and included less sky in this particular instance, because of the lighting you had on this particular day. However, the shape of these, what are they, concrete blocks, I'm assuming, they are interesting blocks. The pattern they make, or the way they're built out in this curve, is interesting, and I like the fact you've got water splashing up with a shutter speed slow enough to blur that water and give us a real feel of the spray as the tide comes in and out over these blocks. So yeah, perfectly decent photograph, but yeah, it's the weather conditions, I think, which were not altogether in your favour on this occasion. Go back if you can, have another go. I think 16 tonight. Okay, next one is Meeting at Sunset. Yes, the sunset behind the bridge, so everything in the picture is silhouetted to all intents and purposes. The bridge, the structure of the bridge itself, and the people on it walking along in both directions. So yeah, an interesting picture, interesting silhouette, interesting shapes. The trees behind the bridge do, to some extent, mask the structure, mask the shape of it. Nothing you can do about that if that's the way it is, but it's a bit of a shame. If you look at the sort of the main supporting pillars towards the right hand side, just where the sun is, they are largely hidden by the trees behind, whereas the supporting structure towards the left-hand side of the frame, you can see the structure quite clearly against the evening sky, and it's a pity you couldn't have had more like that. However, fair enough. I like the silhouetted figures on the top. 3 of them walking along on the right-hand side, a couple of them on the left, slightly overlapping. Ideally, you'd have had more separation between them, but okay. There are a couple of other people there, I think, as well, but they're kind of hidden over the other side of the bridge. You hardly notice them. So yeah, I mean, the idea is great. I like the reflection on the water in the foreground, but I do feel you could probably have less of that. You could crop that off a little and have more of a letterbox format. Might have helped a bit. But other than that, yeah, decent enough photograph. I like there's some birds in the sky there, breaking up the sky. Good. Overall, I think that one's worth a 16. Now we come to the dancer, Elise. Fantastic how these girls can do this kind of leap, isn't it? They look so, so graceful. How, when you're mid-air, do you manage to keep everything perfectly positioned? The toes pointed, the fingers pointed, head up and back. Marvellous shape they create. So, you know, that's a skilled dancer here, showing what she can do in mid-air. And it's a skilled photographer to capture it. Capture the moment, capture her at the peak of the action in a beautiful position there, very well captured, you know, good shape within the picture frame, and her hair flying up as she's flying through the air. The whole thing is quite bright. Again, this is one where maybe I would have liked a darker background so that the pale skin showed up even more strongly, but I think you've captured the moment very well, and it's very graceful and an exciting picture. Yeah, that one, I'm going to make that a 19. Okay, moving on to Isola Bella, if that's how it's pronounced. Another lovely scene. Another one which could grace a catalogue, you know, a holiday catalogue or something like that, to show the beauty of this place. Pleasant little island set in beautiful blue seas, and the blueness of the sea is emphasised by that motorboat in the foreground with its clear white wake. So yeah, a delightful documentary photograph showing this rather lovely setting. I don't know where it is, I don't recognise the name, but it looks a very pleasant place, and I think the way you photographed it records that very well indeed. I wouldn't classify it as particularly original or creative, which is to some extent what I'm looking for in a best competition photograph, but it's certainly very competent, well exposed, and I like the letterbox shape, and yeah, I like the white highlight line around the outside. Let's give that one a 17. Now then, morning walk on a grey, misty morning. My goodness me. I do like the mood of this one. This really creates this feeling of I don't know, an autumnal or winter morning with heavy mist, and you know, this row of trees, the repeated pattern of the trunks on the right leads you down the track. As you wander down the path, it leads you to the trees in the distance, and then fading off to the left into this wonderful grey mist, and then the figure walking down with the dog. Now, the dog has turned round to look at you. Is it your dog? Maybe that's your partner. Dog's turned round to look at you. Oh, there's another of those silly photographers out here taking pictures of us. Would I have preferred the dog to be looking the other way, looking the same direction as the owner, walking along? I think I might have done. But on the other hand, it does create a genuine point of interest, doesn't it, in the picture? The highlight in the picture, when this grey, murky scene, and then you've got this quite light-coloured dog facing you. Yeah, that works okay. I quite enjoy that. I think the overall mood you've captured here is what I'm really enjoying, the greyness of it, and it really creates this feeling of a cold, wintry morning and I think that's done rather well. 18 for that one. Now we have a picture called Sailors Going on Board. Yeah, that's absolute fine description. There appeared to be a column of sailors and they're going on board this submarine. And there's a lady sort of looking out beyond, looking in the other direction. I don't know what she's looking at. I can't help reading the sign when the sign's for me to read. It says water bus departures to Portsmouth attractions. Now tell me, is this submarine the water bus? Are those sailors going off to look at the attractions? Don't think so. So there's a bit of a conflict effectively in this picture. I've got what is clearly a naval vessel, the submarine. We've got the sailors going on board, that's fine. And then you've got lots of other things which don't really relate. The sign about the water bus and the tourist attractions. This lady shielding her eyes and looking out in the opposite direction. The railings in the foreground. I'm not sure what this, some sort of post, this white post with the ropes attached to it going up on the right hand side. It's probably a flag post or something, I'm not sure. There's all kinds of things here, and yes, you've got the sailors going aboard, but it's more than that, isn't it? It's kind of a lot in this picture. It's not just illustrating what I think caught your eye, which is this row of sailors. Now, I'm guessing that certainly within the time you had, and you couldn't get any closer, and maybe this is as close as you could get. So you couldn't just take the sailors climbing that ladder and going up into the submarine, which is a bit of a shame. I like the fact you've got the conning tower, is that what they call it, on the sub. There's an aerial or something just poking out the top of the picture. That's a shame. Yeah, it's an interesting scene, an interesting subject, but as a photograph, it's not really working as a coherent picture. So although I like the idea, for me tonight this is a 15. Now we move on to another studio portrait, Sophia. Sophia with the long black or very dark hair and the black fingernails. Yeah, very moody. Quite a pleasant picture. It's an interesting. It's almost. And I was going to say I've got the feeling it's almost soft focus, but I look at it better. Look at it again more closely, and it's actually pin sharp throughout. I don't know why I had that impression. I think it may be something to do with the lighting you've got. The lighting, her skin looks very smooth and soft, and quite bright on the fingers, poking around the top of this veil. Is that the same lacy veil we saw earlier in the picture of Beck's? Not sure. Maybe it's the same studio session. This is quite enjoyable. The two things that are slightly disturbing me. First, those fingers poking around the lace. They are very bright, and they're attracting my eye up there. And that's emphasised even more by the fact that her eyes are quite low in the frame. They're at least halfway down the picture. And I tend to want more below her eyes than above her eyes in the picture. So, you've got space above the top of her head there. Could we have had a little bit more of her neck and of her hair and maybe of her shoulder? And the fact that she's quite low in the frame, as I say, is emphasised, I think, by this bright fingers poking around the top there. And yet it's quite a pleasant idea, isn't it? Her right eye is just kind of showing through. It's kind of hidden. The idea is good. I think it's not quite come off as I would have hoped. The lighting hasn't worked out for you well in this case. It's good on her face, but as I say, too high on the fingers. You might be able to tone down the tone on the fingers in post-processing if you try that out. I think there's enough detail there. It should work okay. But overall, I'm going for a 17 on that one. Now we move on to this extremely simple construction called negative space. And yes, there is a great deal of negative space in this picture. but I think it rather works. It's very, very simple. It's a simple design. I'm just trying to work out what techniques you might have used on it. The sea itself is full of these sort of horizontal lines, which I take it to be the waves, but they're quite smoothed out as if it was a long exposure, or the camera had moved horizontally during the exposure. But of course the yacht that's sitting there is perfectly sharp, which kind of contradicts either of those assumptions. But I like that effect on the sea. I like this. It almost looks like a cloth, a rippling cloth stretched horizontally. So you've got these creases along it. It's really rather good. And the yacht is in a very strong position there, sailing to this big open space, and this graduated colour in the sky, from the pink at the top to the almost sort of purple almost at the bottom as it approaches the horizon, approaches the sea. Very simple construction, and it's amazing how successful something as simple as this can be. I think simplicity often works in a picture. You may have noticed that in some of the earlier photographs I was complaining about there being too much in the picture, too many conflicts to know what we're really supposed to be looking at. Here there's absolutely no doubt at all. It's a simple composition, and I think it really does work rather well. Quite enjoying that. 18. Okay, and finally we move on to Mum's Kiss, it's called, the Grey Seal Mum and Pup. Well, it's an picture, isn't it? It really works rather well. It's rather lovely, very attractive, and I think you've included everything you need to in the picture. It's you've got in close enough, so there's nothing unwanted in the picture, but equally I don't think you've left anything out that needs to be there. It's beautifully sharp on the pup, and indeed on the mum. It's her snout is sharp, and I think the eyes look sharp to me as well. So you've got sufficient depth of field there to get everything you need in sharp focus. The pup's eyes are very dark, but that's the way they are. No, I think that's a lovely scene, well captured. That's going to be an 18. Okay, now that's the last picture. Let me just see. Okay, now I haven't prepared this as I thought I had, so I'm going to have to go back now through the pictures that I've seen. So apologies for this. I'm going back first of all to Elise, the dancer, and I'm going to give that a highly commended. I'm also going back to the flamenco. That one also is going to get highly commended. The second shot of Bex, the portrait, where she's called Bex rather than Becky, I think that's delightful. That's a highly commended. Now then, as for the first, second and third, you have 3 20s, I believe, and I'm going to just scroll through the pictures till I find the ones that I want. If I go back to the beginning, oops. All right. Barn Owl, that got a 20. That I'm going to make second. Now I'm scrolling through the pictures to find a woman's work, that one. That I really like. I just find that such a pleasant picture and very well controlled. I'm going to make that one first. So the other 20, which was the glass at Q, that gets third position. Lovely set of images. Thank you very much indeed. I've really enjoyed that. I've enjoyed judging both the sections so far, both the preliminary and the intermediate. So my next job is to go on to the advanced. Thank you.